Hey, is this Eric? Hi, this is other Eric. I'm working on getting Skype set up. It's Eric.Keithley67, is that right? I'm not sure that I have the correct Skype username, or are you logged into Skype right now? Okay. Can you reset your username? I had to step away from my computer to get any reception at all here. I honestly don't use it very much, so I didn't know. I think it's adams.eric. Okay, we'll do it. All right. Okay. All right, bye-bye. Were there this few people here?
I'm sorry, what?
Were there this few people here last time around this time?
I don't recall.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm worried.
Looks like that was posted kind of late though, right?
It got
Yeah,
posted
understood
really
that I was
late.
talking again, they decided not to come.
Oh. That couldn't possibly be the case.
I think you could.
Could.
Only 4 people are RSVP.
Oh, no.
At least you're here though. I went to the serverless meeting, literally nobody showed up. Like not even the organizer.
Oh, no. You know, it's June. It's June 22. Like, it kind of, this is, you know, school got out a week ago. I think a lot of people are out of town right now. About a week ago. And I have 5 pizzas on the way, so at least we'll be
We can
well
have a good
fed.
time.
And 30 beers. What could go wrong?
So who's gonna eat all the pizza? I got the beer card.
Oh, right. Naturally. All right. I will be back in a moment.
Hey guys.
Hello.
We're just talking about whether any of you showed up. So.
Oh, we showed up.
Right, it was actually crazy. Yesterday we were like, we should look for some like Python meetup in the area because we're here for the summer.
Welcome to AWPUG.
Okay.
Where are you here from?
We both finished college in Boston and now we're here for the summer and then going to San Francisco in August.
Cool. Awesome. What brought you here for the summer?
You can.
I'm doing an internship at a biotech company. I'm a bioinformatician.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fun. Well, I think we may be like people showing up to this thing.
That's
That'd
okay.
be fun.
But 5 pizzas and 30 beers, that's enough to keep me around.
Yeah, we will go. Got a laptop.
Yeah.
20 bucks, isn't it?
Go to my work computer. The screen is so tiny that it's like. It's okay over here.
a tour and talk to you, bring you in about it, and then, yeah, I don't think we have any problem.
Yeah, you wanna like,
It's this whole memory thing. And,
What'd she say?
Yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I would just submit one.
oh yeah, it's like a
Yeah,
Slack,
yeah,
but it
but,
works.
fully.
You just hit Kairos.
You can choose, me as well. It's, I don't,
Yeah.
you
Okay.
want, to stick those with, it's just Nick at Capital Factory. Nick at Capital Factory. Yeah.
What?
Okay, yeah, just, drop me a note. So I remember to do that.
These chairs promote sitting up, which is something you need to do.
so,
They have these like fancy like couches that I go to
Is there an
sometimes.
event going on?
Yes.
Oh, what is it?
The Austin Web Python user group.
Oh, okay. You want to wait? You want to see it, Ramesh? Okay, we can see it. What is it?
And they have these like really like high backs, and then they arrange like 3 of them. I think it's supposed to be for like a if you had like private meetup or something. But you can literally sit there and like no one, because they're like all over. They have like this high back, and then they're all arranged there. So sometimes when my back hurts a lot, I go there, and I have a super comfy pillow. Just like lay. Like one of the devs is pregnant. Like, oh, I told you the one who wants to name her kid whatever the awful name is. Agnes.
Oh yeah.
She goes there 6 because she's 9 months pregnant.
Hello? That's me.
Wow. Look at this.
Sorry,
It's
can you
like
repeat that?
another thing on Facebook.
Oh, on the 5th floor.
I think I
Oh, 1st floor. Okay, I'll be right down. Getting pizza, y'all. And then we'll get it going.
turning on 2-factor authentication for iCloud. But it keeps annoying me. Thank you.
Hey there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you just fine.
Oh
Loud and
man.
clear.
All right. Cool. I'm just kind of I just ran in the door. I have finally gotten food sort of squared away. So
Okay.
Cool. So everyone, welcome to AWPUG for June. This is our third and final installment of a Flask series that Tipton Cole is doing. And our food and beverage today was kindly provided by a couple of gentlemen that I'm going to let have the floor for a few minutes. So this is Eric and Brian. Go ahead and take it away.
All right, well, thank you very much. We are actually from Blue Compass. I'm hearing a lot of echo. Is that on your end, or is that?
Let me see what I can do about that.
You should just be able to mute.
Okay, because you're coming along, coming across loud and clear to me.
Got it. I
Undistracted.
probably need to mute my end. Just a sec here. Is this better?
Let's see if I'm talking now. That's fantastic. I cannot hear. So I'm only going to talk for probably a minute or two, because I would like to present a little bit of information that I sent to you in the bullets that I forwarded. That I would ask that maybe that you could send along after this meeting.
Will do.
And then open it up for some questions. And also, if I leave anything out, Brian is here to make sure that I don't forget some vital information about what's coming up. So very briefly, thanks again for listening. What we want to share with you is some information about an upcoming hackathon that's being held in Austin at Gather on North Lamar Road. And it's on Saturday, July 29th, starting at 9 a.m., finishing up Sunday evening, so it's most of the weekend. The purpose of the hackathon is to create the next generation of immersive experiences. And what that means is that we're interested in novel ways to predict, model, simulate what conflict might look like in 2030. I want to make sure that that this is not about promoting conflict or fighting, but it's about predicting what kinds of societal, economic, or natural issues that could draw humanity into conflict with each other or with nature at the end of the next decade. All right. So some of the ideas that we want to put forth that I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the flyer, Eric, or anybody else, but some of the things that we want people to think about, and this is not limiting to what people could look at, but just some seed ideas are what would issues in space look like? For example, will we be flying around the solar system in space planes, or will the proliferation of space junk start causing problems for our satellites? Will artificial intelligence and machine learning in all the computers? I mean, I think of all the science fiction that we've seen that have come closer to what reality has become, I suppose, and is always on the in the backs of our minds about what machines could possibly do to take over the world. Is things like that. Could that come about, or could they be used to predict social issues and looking at trends and climate, population growth, and other factors that could be factors in those kinds of conflict that I was talking about? Can we simulate conflicts in other ways and come up with solutions of how to mitigate them? And then maybe the use of drones or small satellites, and what other kinds of technologies could we have in 2030 at the end of the next decade that could be brought to bear to simulate, predict, to what would we be looking at that point in time? So those are some ideas that we would ask people to think about, come prepared, to participate. Some practical information about the hackathon. It is sponsored by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. There is going to be a $5,000 prize for the winner, for the winning team. NGA will also, that's their three-letter acronym, they will also be there ready to interview and even able to give contingent offers to people on site. So they're definitely looking for some very interesting and novel ideas to help bring into the government, into their agency. And finally, one thing to make sure is that people know is that anything that they create, any code and approaches that people create at the hackathon will remain their own intellectual property. So they will walk away and be able to reuse anything that they create. Brian, did I cover all the highlights? Anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, for the most part, that's pretty much everything. I would just add that when it comes to the theme or the topic that I've already talked to a lot of folks, and some of the ideations that have come up is how can technology improve pre-conflict events and or post-conflict events? Helping out with wounded soldiers, using virtual reality therapies, or utilizing augmented reality or virtual realities to visualize social unrest that are going on around the world. Obviously, artificial intelligence, machine learning to predict that type of thing. Yeah, so it's really wide open to whatever your imagination can think of. So nothing's really too crazy, because that's kind of the whole point. It's just to kind of think of the craziest thing you can, and then odds of that being somewhere near reality are probably pretty good.
All right.
Great. All right.
And what are the dates one more time?
July 29th and 30th.
All right, July 29th and 30th, the NGA hackathon. Cool. Thank you so much for thank you for the refreshments and the call.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Eric, I'll send you a follow-up email. And,
all right.
Talk to you later.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. And because everyone likes hearing me so much, I will just say, without further ado, I will let Mr. Cole take it away. Can we get a nice warm round of applause? Thank you.
Okay, guys. This is going to be informal.
Sounds good.
Yay!
There will not be a quiz.
I'm going to grab pizza.
We're going to treat this as a seminar.
Does anyone want a beer? I can go pour one. I guess our beer's never.
I think everybody gets one pizza.
One pizza.
Yeah. There are 5 pizza here. There are 5 people here. Everybody gets a pizza. So pick whichever one you like.
All of us sat through that whole 5-minute talk, so that's your reward.
You want to take a minute and have a slice of pizza? That's fine.
I'm going to pour a beer.
We're doing import.
Okay.
Would you like a beer?
Not for me, thanks.
Do you want to share one? Yeah. Okay, we'll share one.
Okay.
Like I said, we can be a little informal
Okay.
about this. This is the third, and I guess thankfully last, given the way the audience has dwindled, talk on visible Flask. Hang on. Let's see if I can kill that message. All right. We'll catch up this way. Visible Flask is built off of the Visible Man game toy from a few years back, and I actually finally read the box cover here and discovered that there's a disclaimer that says the parts are undecorated and paints are not included. Once you see my graphic style on the way that I put slides together, you'll understand why that's significant. The first round of this was back in February, apparently, and I started talking about the big picture of how Flask operates. What are all the big moving parts? The idea for this whole series was not really to be a tutorial, but to get people comfortable with the idea that Flask is a nice, solid piece of stuff that does a lot of great things for you. And if you just climb into it through other people's tutorials, that it'll pay real dividends. At the same time, I wanted to understand, when I started doing all of this, I was very insecure working with frameworks. I had worked a long time ago with Ruby on Rails, and when I got into doing Python work and looked at Django and looked at Flask, I went to the simpler, simpler, more restrained framework that Flask is, in large part because I wasn't fond of ORMs. I found myself fighting the ORM most of the time because I was insecure that it was doing everything that I wanted it to do. I had a little bit of the same problem with Flask for a while, but after examining it, I became a lot more comfortable with it, and I've been using it for quite a while now. Anyway, the big picture was to look at the flow back and forth from the browser to your application. It's the movement of data. You're presenting something based on the data that you have. You get actions or operations from the user of the browser that may include adding or changing data, or it may just be navigational that moves you around. But you're constantly sending data back and forth. And that's pretty much the way that I view these things. I'm a database guy, and as I look at the operations, I just want the data to go back and forth. One of the great things about Flask is that it does a lot of work to take the problems of dealing with the HTTP protocol off of the programmer's shoulders. I mean, it does a wonderfully thorough job, and I presented some of that a few months ago. We got into a lot more detail last month. We got down and started looking at some of the Flask code to see which things were most important and how they were put together. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to take some very specific pieces that were mentioned previously and just walk through very steadily, browser to server to browser, how the data moves back and forth, what our vectors are for doing this. Now, in the HTTP protocol, every time you do a request, your domain cookies get sent across to the server. The cookies go. If you have a query string on your URL, the query string goes across as part of the URL. That's where the request.args come from in Flask. If you're doing a post type transaction, or one in the post family, a put or an update, something like that, that sends a form across, then that winds up in the Flask request.form. In addition, Flask keeps its own session. It really is a session cookie, and it shows up, by the way, as one of the cookies, but the session object itself, actually a dictionary in the request, in the application, is dealt with separately from the request.cookies. And then finally, if we're going back to the browser, we'll look at how a little bit of how the Jinja works with the application. By the way, I did want to say that I gave this talk a month ago on a Thursday night. Friday night, I wound up in the ER with pneumonia. So if you remember any of that, if you were actually here, I was coughing through the night and hacking and so forth. And I'm hoping for better results this time around. I'm feeling better. Anyway, now, I found in trying to put together these details that I almost necessarily have to slide into a little bit of the tutorial style in order to do this, because we're going to get down in some real details. And so what I'm going to do is This is a very small little project that I'm doing that's nothing more than just a utility to look at a database that I'm building so that I can see what's in it and maybe do a few tweaks on the contents of the database. It's a very small piece of stuff. The whole project fits nicely on one screen here. And we're going to talk about these 4 files, and that's going to be it for tonight, really. But the init.py is part of the Flask application definition. The view driver is actually the program that you run from Python that sets things up and that sets up the application and runs it. The views.py is what's called the view functions, some of the view functions in the application. And the exm node detail, the HTML file, is a Jinja template that's used to build the HTML page from data that's in the Flask application. So just through those files alone, we're going to go pick through them and find how the pieces are put together. Now, quick question. Had you guys worked with Flask before? Any of you? Okay, I got 2 nods. Okay, I got 2 nods. All right, so we're 50-50. All right. This is a pretty typical setup. Actually have a couple of pieces here that's selected at the startup that are blueprints. But the rest of this, the init py, the views py, having the driver program and the templates, that's all very standard Flask application, Flask project setup. What I'm going to do here, just for the setting context, is I'm going to break out of the presentation here. By the way, this is Keynote. Not PowerPoint. I just want you to know you didn't get PowerPointed tonight. This is a Keynote, which makes it really difficult to work with. But we're going to break out, spend just a few minutes in an application here. All right, so this is that application I was telling you about it, and I'm just going to quickly run through to pick up the place where we want to be. And when we get there, I'll try to make this bigger. That's as big as it's going to get, apparently. It's the bottom part of this that we're interested in. Okay? Now, as the page is set up, these 3 lines here are a form in the HTML page. The rest of it's displayed. And all we're going to do is just put a description in there. All right? And send it off. So we edited that one element in the database. Full disclosure, I didn't actually change the database because I keep running back and forth through this, so I just show that I changed the database. If we go over here, I'm running this. Let's see. And this is not going to be terribly visible, guys. I'm sorry about that. But when I run this, I pick up a bunch of debug output, and I'm going to show pieces of this as we build, but that's where it comes from. That's where the content for a lot of the slides come from. And I will show, let's see if this works.
Should be able to Command++.
I'm going to go to presentation mode, and we're going to find out if that's big enough here. Nope, it doesn't really help all that much. All right. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Let me get out of the presentation mode so that I can move on.
I think pinch works.
What's that?
I think pinch works.
Oh, that's right, isn't it? In presentation mode.
Even outside of it, I think.
It does. All right. Well, let's go. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. We're going to show most of this on the slides anyway, so let me go back to that for the moment. Okay, we're going to look at those 4 files. You saw the transaction. The transaction was just to go into a page with a form, make a data entry, send it back, and then it comes back to the browser from the server after the update has taken place. So this is what we saw. The initial run through was just go in, change a value, and come back to the page. Now, going through those 4 files, the init.py is the commonly in Flask applications, it's where you set up the Flask, set up the use of Flask. So you import the library and then you set up, this is the application. Now I mentioned previously that if you look at most of the tutorials, everything is called app. Everything is app. And it frustrated the hell out of me when I started using this stuff that everything was app. You have an outer directory app, you have an inner directory app, you have a variable named app, you have another object somewhere named app, and you don't know when you're looking at this stuff, when you're new to it, where, you know, which of these things are required to share a name and which ones aren't, how much control you have over it. It's very frustrating. I'm sorry, it always was frustrating for me, and so I don't do that. Okay. Now what I did do, just back to here, is you'll notice that the outer directory and the application directory share the same name. Now normally in a tutorial they would both be called app. Okay. I kept them with the same name. That's pretty common. It's almost universal in the Flask world to do that. And rather than artificially change that, I decided to keep it. Also, it really gets exhausting coming up with more new names all the time for everything and making them sensible. This is a place where I surrendered and kept the name. All right, so the way you start Flask is you import Flask and then you create an application, usually with this syntax. The name is used here. It's the name of the module that you're in. And what this is explained in the documentation. You can put other values in here. Generally speaking, this works just fine. And it's the value that Flask uses when it's trying to resolve locations of assets to draw on. It's essentially, it identifies the directory from which it'll go searching for templates and static files and blueprints and other things like that. So it's useful just to follow this. Again, and you can control it, and if you have a reason to do so, you should change it. But this almost always works, this syntax, using the name of the module in which you create the, it's not the name of the module, but it's actually the directory in which the module resides that's pulled out of that. All right. Then you go to the driver program, and what the driver program does is it imports this application that you made here. I'm sorry, I'm pointing to my screen. It imports this application, import the EXM application. It imports the views, which is actually the views.py file that we'll look at in a minute. And then it uses the run function of the application to start the program running. Okay? Again, this is standard operation. You'll see it in almost every tutorial that you run across. All right, so I mentioned the views.py. Very early on, I think in the very first talk, I went through what was for me for a long time a complete mystery as to how Flask was doing some of what it was doing. And a big part of these frameworks is the process of routing, okay? What the routing consists of is taking the URL information off of your, from your browser when you communicate to the server, and using that information to find what function or operation you want to perform, okay? The common terminology is that, in this case, update node is called a view function. It's also called an endpoint, but it's called a view function. That is, it's something from the views, and this terminology, I think, goes all the way back to Ruby on Rails. I'm not sure. I think it's used in Django as well, isn't it? Does anybody know? Anyway, this is in a file called views, and that file has as many of these functions as are necessary for as many making endpoints for the routing information. And so when we were doing the program sample, what happens when I hit the submit button, we'll go forward here for just a second, looking at the form that was on the browser at the time that we submitted the change to the data. That form action is update node ID, and then it had just a placeholder query string just to show that the query string can be transmitted. But that action is the route that you're going to follow in the Flask application. That's the that identifies the endpoint where you're going to wind up. Okay, the endpoint being the update node function. All right. So sitting here with a file that has 10 or 15 of these endpoints in it, and I could not for the life of me figure out how Flask was making these connections, until I realized that way back here in the driver program, you can do it elsewhere, but the driver is a common place to do it. It did an import of views. That's the views.py program. What I didn't catch for the longest time was the fact that Python is an interpreted language. When you import views, it executes the code. The execution of the code means, among other things, that it executes this decorator. Okay? Now this is a function definition. That means when it hits the def, it just builds that function so that it can be called later. The decorator, however, is its own operation, and the decorator, in addition to wrapping the function, uses this to build a table of routes, calling this string here the route. It builds a table of routes and matches up that route with this function, so that when the browser sends a URL that begins with update and then has something that looks like a node ID, or it qualifies as a node ID, then it's going to find the endpoint that's this function, and it's going to execute that function. Okay? Now again, this is, my purpose here is to get our fingernails dirty, looking at exactly what's happening to transfer this data. Okay, the first thing that has to happen to transfer the data is you've got to come to the right place. And that's what the routing does. It takes you there. This example has another parameter on the routing decorator, which is the methods. Which methods this decorator will accept. The default is it accepts a get method, okay? Now, in fact, the default includes get, head, and options methods, okay? Head and options are very seldom used. And if you want to use any other methods, you have to declare them explicitly. Now, again, most commonly, this is shown, it would be methods, and it would show both get and post. I didn't, and it's just because I wasn't thinking about it when I prepared this. So this accepts a post transaction. The details of what it's doing here, we're going to leave for just a little while, but understand that the data flow is that you have this, this route. It accepts a post, and when you get a post, you get a form. You get form data. So, what's going to happen when we execute that, when we click the submit button on that page that has a form in it, is it's going to send off this action. It's going to send off a query string with it. It's going to include identify the method, the HTTP method as a post, okay? And it's going to send the form contents. The way the form is transmitted as data, it's transmitted as essentially a dictionary, a key value, a set of keys and values. The keys are taken, the keys are taken from the name attribute of the input field, and the values are taken from the value attribute when you do the transmission. So what you get, whoops, through those 4 files. Now, I talked about visible Flask and my ability to put together a slideshow. This is my reminder to switch over to debug mode so that something will stop and we can see it. Okay, so I'm going to go do that here. And that's in this file. I set a breakpoint there. Come on. Whoop. All right, so I've set a breakpoint, and we'll go back and hang on. Need to see whether I'm supposed to do this or not. Yeah, I'm supposed to do this. All right, so actually, no, I can leave that there. We'll leave that there for the moment and go back to the presentation. All right, so we saw that screen. We did the operation. We changed the value. When we hit the submit button, hang on. All right. There, all right. Originally, the data came from the server, and this is what the data consisted of. I had I'm working out of a graph, network X graph, and my nodes in the graph I call nodes. So the original node value had a name value, didn't have a description value, and it had some dates in it, and that's what was sent to the browser to start with. And we saw that came up with the description field empty, just like that. All right. We then filled in the string what's happening as a description and hit the submit button. And when we did that, everything that the browser sends to the server got sent. So we sent over the URL from the action. The URL included a query string. We sent across all the domain cookies. We sent across the form, and we sent across, in this case, in particular, the Flask controlled session cookie. So this, we don't really do anything directly with the cookies and what I'm doing here, but I wanted to stress the point that all of those elements are vectors for sending data from the browser to the server. I should add, there's at least one more vector, which is you can make your own headers and send that information across as well. I just didn't want to get that deeply into things. So cookies come across, and if we look at here.
What is setting the request cookie session if it's not Flask?
Hang on. I'm sorry, what was the question again?
In your note, you say request cookie session is not the same as Flask session, so.
Right, well, the thing is, they have the same information in them, they're just different objects, okay? Okay, Flask, specifically, the Flask session, here, let me show. When you go into the views programs, one of the things that I import is session, okay? And that's just a separate thing that's treated. Now, we talked about this some in the earlier talks. I'll go ahead and take a minute to recapitulate. These are all Flask elements of one sort or another. The render template is a function. The request is this huge object that Flask is managing to handle the HTTP protocol for requests. And we did, in the previous talk, I showed a lot of detail inside the Flask source code to illustrate where all this stuff came from. The session is really just a dictionary of key value pairs. And then for the views PY, we have to import the app as well. That's what the EXM is, that's the Flask application object. So that's where all of those things come from. And when I say, this is just a caution, don't go diving into request.cookie session in order to get the stuff. You just deal with the Flask session object and life is easier. That's what that's for. All right, so cookies come across. The request.args, okay, the args from the query string in the form action come across as well, and Flask splits them out and gives you a request.args with every key and value pair from the query string. I'm not using them here, but they're as accessible as the form fields are. It's made pretty much the same way. Request.args looks pretty much the same as request.form. You can deal with either one of them if you want to use them. I don't use the args very much, so I didn't have a good setup for it, so I just made it arbitrary here. I'll show that the data comes across. One thing I did want to stress, though, is that the args, the request.args is a class that we talked about in the previous last month. This is one of Flask's special types that they make, an immutable multi-dictionary. Okay, they take a dictionary, they make it immutable so that they can protect all of the HTTP data. It's supposed to be immutable. That's part of the protocol. They make it, immutable as they send it across. Now you can pull it out and do anything you want to with it, but you can't change that dictionary. Yes.
Could you just 30 seconds talk about?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Oh, the HTTP protocol. I'm not super familiar with that. Could you just
The HTTP protocol is the way that browsers communicate with servers. Yeah. Okay, that's what actually, the definition of the HTTP protocol defines how servers can talk to browsers and vice versa. It is enormously large and convoluted.
Very deep rabbit hole.
Yes, and one of the great benefits of Flask is that it hides most of the detail of that protocol from you. I'm sorry, it doesn't hide it. It handles most of the detail with reasonable assumptions, reasonable standards and defaults, all of which it will then give you control of if you really want to go do that. Okay, but that's what the HTTP protocol is. Making this immutable. We discussed some of this last month in going in and looking at some of the code, and I talked about with some of the folks in the, that attended last month. The Flask code is, I look at a lot of other people's code, and the Flask code is some of the very best that I've ever seen. And if you look back through it and see how they develop, because they have a lot of the history of the development of the product is in the code. It shows when different elements were introduced, which release of the product they were introduced with. You can see how it's gotten more and more, not just robust, but thorough in dealing with things. Doing something like creating a type, creating a class of immutable dictionaries in order to protect users, but also in some respects to conform to the details of the HTTP protocol. I don't know whether Django does that. I don't know whether other frameworks do that, like Bottle and so forth, but Pyramid. But I'm impressed with the thoroughness that I see in the source code for Flask. All right, then we get into some values that the session that are actually used in the code that I wrote for this little application. The session values, the way this is written, I have to go find databases, and I identify the databases, and within the databases I have collections that are called mark sets, and I pick up the IDs to work with them one at a time. The to and fro I put in there just to guarantee that the session would change every time we went back and forth, and I'll show you why we're doing that in a little while. But if that's one set of values that come across. Now, the great thing about the session values is in Flask pretty much the standard way of preserving your state. You preserve state by identifying enough key information that you can call up the particular user's information and the context, the detailed context from your last trip in order to continue the transactional process that you're in. So you stuff into the session, into the Flask session, you stuff in as much information as you need, and maybe a little extra. You don't have to be too careful about it. You can stuff in some extra things as well, just to make life easier, not just the necessities. And then after the session values, we're going to go look at the form. So we have the form set up, and I've already mentioned, we talked about it some already. In order to transfer the form information, you have to have a post method in your HTTP call request. The form keys for the fields in the form are taken from the name attribute of the input fields. And that form data is captured by routes that have a post. I'm sorry, again, I'm pointing at my screen on the computer. In order to capture the form data in Flask, you have to have a post method identified also. So the default is only gets. If you want to have a post, you have to explicitly declare it. That transfers the form data across to the server. Okay? In the debug output, you saw that big long list of debug output at one point. The form part of it shows the following. It shows that the request.form, that's the form element of the request object. The request.form, again, that's a dictionary. The topic name value is the DND. The topic description is what I just typed in, what's happening. When it comes across, you can deal with the request.form. You can name another, you can say x equals request.form and start talking about x sub topic name, however you want to do that, but you have access then to the form values, and that's where they come from. So, just getting from the browser to the server. Detailed view, browser to the server. We change the data content and the form input field. Send a request to the Flask application by hitting the submit button. The Flask request.form field name, that value is available to update the server-side data. Flash session information is used for context and for state information. The request.args and the cookies data is also available. I don't show the use in the example that we gave here. All right, that gets the data over to the server. Okay, update the server-side data, and I have the output that shows that we update that data. And then we're going to, at the end of the process here, we're then going to do a render template and send data back to the browser. So, render template is imported. That's a function, that's a standard Flask function, and it drives off of this file, exm node detail HTML. That's actually going to be a Jinja template that has mixed HTML code and Jinja instructions on how to use data from your Flask application program, from your Python program. And the way you get that data to make it available to the template is you include it as parameters in the render template call. So among the things that are sent across are the database ID, the mark set ID, and a node ID. And some or all of those things will appear in the template code. So, this is part of the form of the HTML file, exm node detail.html. This is a section of that. Those parameters that we sent to the render template, we can see that the node ID is used up here so that I can set a local variable in this template that gets used down here. So I set using the node ID, I set it's a dictionary. I set a dictionary called node, and then I access the name value and the description value from the node, and I put them respectively in the input field within the form that corresponds to the topic name and the topic description. So that's the same form it came from, but it goes back to it. You see other places where we use a notation in Jinja. The double curly braces indicate that I'm going to put a variable into there. I'm going to evaluate a variable. It's going to turn into a string, and I'm going to put that string right there. And so here, showing we've got an if statement, a set, an else statement, and an end if. These are simple controls. Jinja gives you over the process of building the template based on the data that you have from your Python application. So based on the data, you can put things in sometimes and not put them in other times. So for instance, if the node ID that I sent across is not in the collection of nodes that I'm interested in, nothing gets displayed except the message, no node found. If I find it there, then under that condition, I'll put in this HTML text. So it's a little bit quicker here going back. That is, the data passed to the Jinja template via the Flask render template function. Those Python values are used in the Jinja template to, they're incorporated into the HTML page that's being sent across. The Jinja, the example that we saw, used a set, used an if, had variables put in, and once Jinja has built up that entire HTML page, it gets transmitted to the browser. Just a small item. When you're sending things across to the browser, the render template does a lot of work packaging in the same way that the request element of the application is cognizant of all of the HTTP protocol requirements. The render template is also cognizant of HTTP protocol requirements going the other way. And one of the fun ones that you'll run into if you try to shortcut some of this stuff, and it's easy to think about the fact that when you send an HTML page back to the browser, it really is just a big long string, okay? It's just text, okay? If, however, you build a string variable and you send that string variable to the browser, the HTTP protocol will take that string and send it over one character at a time, a separate transmission of each character. You have to package it properly in order to get a response that sends over the whole bulk of everything at one time. That's just one of those things that maybe everybody gets caught with. Maybe it was just me, but it was confusing for a while before I figured that one out. Okay, so been through the 4 files. Looked at the process. After all the work we did on the previous 2 talks, this seems kind of small in some ways to see that. But it's a part of the application, part of the process that I was most interested in. That is, like I said, I'm a database guy, and I'm most interested in, all right, I need to present things to users, I need to take their reactions back, and then I need to act on that stuff and represent whatever it is they asked for, or whatever the consequences of their actions were. And that sounds pretty simple, but as good as Flask is, and as good as the other frameworks are, you still have to know an enormous amount of detail in order to work with it effectively. And that's where the tutorials come in and are very useful. They will walk you through in small steps, putting things together. And if you do what they say, you will see what it is that they're showing you. The purpose of the explorations for these 3 talks was so that when you're putting these things together as they tell you to do it, you have an appreciation for what's actually going on. It's not just monkey see, monkey do, but it is a recognition that, okay, this is helping me get this piece of data there. This is helping me build my HTML page this way. This preserves state. This allows me to do detailed processing. This lets me hand off to another process. That is, once you get into it, you still have to know things such as the organization of the project. You've got to know the sequence in which things are executed. I start with the driver. He imports from the init. That causes that to go. He imports from here. That causes to build the route tables. By the way, the blueprint commands in the init.py cause the routing tables to be built for the blueprinted parts of the application. So they're not built exactly the same way, but they're built to the same effect. If you want to get the stuff out of a form in Flask, you have to know, ultimately, you have to know that it's in request.form. You have to know that your query string stuff is in request.arg. So for all of those things, there are still details that you have to be aware of, and part of what I was trying to do is to show those details, not necessarily to get you through an entire application, but to show those details so that you know it's there and you can go look for it. All right, so this says show debug value changes. All right, I'm going to go, have to exit this, go over to the program here. I've got that going. All right. Now I'm going to back up and go back in. My debugger's running. And I'm going to make it go ahead and go here. Hang on.
It paused in the template?
What's that?
It paused in the template?
Yes, and that's one of the things that I wanted to show off, is this is very cool, and I didn't really know this. I think I ran across this a long time ago, but I hadn't actually used it until preparing for this talk. And I went in and put the breakpoint in the template, and it breaks. It breaks going out and it breaks coming in.
All right.
It's very useful, and I'd had no idea before, until a couple of days ago that was happening. But what I wanted to show about that, hang on, is go to the debugger, and now I'm going to okay, when I come back to the debugger, I'm sorry, this I don't think expands. Yeah, the pinch doesn't work on this, okay? But go ahead, if you want to climb up here or over there. What's significant about this is the blue fields. In the PyCharm debugger, when you move from one step to the next, it will show in blue those values that have changed since your last view of the debugger. And I just wanted to let you guys see all the stuff. No, go ahead and stay there for a second. Go ahead and stay there for a second. Because I'm going to show you down at the very bottom is where the session values are. They changed. And going up, the method values, the post method value changed. Remember, when I first went to that page, it was with a get because it was just showing the form. And then when I made the change and requested the update, I used a post method. So the method value changes. Going up further, the endpoint changes. That is, I used a different endpoint to show the page originally than the one I'm showing going to when I do the post. And so forth going up. The URL rules like the endpoint. Hang on, I wanted to show off here. The query string has changed. There was no query string on the original get. And you see that values are stored in more than one place. That post method appears in multiple locations. And so do other values. This I thought was interesting. These are all the header values that change when you going to the post. Here, the form values change. They get filled in. Again, the endpoint has changed. You saw that before in another structure. My cookies changed. Let's see. Anything else? The args changed. That's a query string. And by the way, the args here is request.args. This is all under the request object, as you see here. So, this was my cool surprise for this talk, is that, and I don't know about other IDEs, but in the PyCharm editor, in the PyCharm IDE, you can run in debug mode and you can set breakpoints. Not everywhere. Some places won't take it, but within the template, you can set breakpoints at different parts of the template. And I tried it, and there were some HTML command lines where it wouldn't take a breakpoint. But anyway, I wanted to show that off. I thought it was extremely cool.
So you just press the line number and then press run, and then
It's just inside of the line number.
okay.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you
here,
press
let me-
run, there's no like debug.
Here,
mode?
let me show that off here right quick.
Okay.
I can expand this.
That $100 a year, for PyCharm costs, it's not anymore.
Is this big enough to see yet? Yeah, that's big enough to see. So where you set the breakpoints is in this gutter over here right beside the line numbers. And I think if I go to the div, yeah, it won't set on the div. It'll set here. Doesn't set on the end tag for the form. Doesn't set on the...
Just lines where there's curly braces, like.
I don't know what it is. I mean, well, actually, let's check it. If that were true, it should work on the input field. And it does. Does it work on the label field here? Doesn't work on the label. So maybe it's only where there are Jinja things going on. So non-Jinja, nothing there. Non-Jinja, nothing there. Jinja, it breaks. Okay, I think that's probably it. I don't really know for sure, but that seems likely given the experience that we're having here. I want to take these off. So anyway, that was, like I said, that was the big fun reveal out of this was I use the PyCharm IDE, and I have for quite a while. I get very good results out of it. I like it a lot. Other folks do things different ways. A guy who works with me really likes working debuggers, so that's what we learned. I will take questions if you got any. Yes, sir.
Have you used Flask to build a backend API that's returning, let's say, JSON instead of an HTML template?
Yes, I've used Flask to transfer JSON packages back and forth as well, yes.
How does that differ then from what we've seen here?
There's a specific call to package things as a JSON object that's available, JSONify or something like that. The Flask version may have a slightly different name. I don't remember right now. It's been a while since I've done it. But yes, I have done it. It works just fine. Anything else?
I was gonna ask, like, what things do you use Python or Flask for in your job?
Well, I don't really use it much in my job. My day job, I'm an expert witness in computer software cases. I do Python for fun. This is the little project I showed here is one small aspect of something I've been diddling with for years. But in the process of doing that, like I said, I did things very awkwardly for a long time. I tend to write very dumb code. It looks a lot like Pascal. when I write it, even though it's Python. I like things to be transparent and obvious. I don't like myself using very obscure syntax and structures. I will say that inside of the code for Flask, I find a lot of it obscure. I have to work at it sometimes to figure out what the hell they're doing. It's elegant. It's just not obvious if you're not a top tier Python developer. Nevertheless, I recommend it very highly, and not just for Flask. There are other products out there that have source code available off of GitHub or other locations. And if you want to learn what something does, if you want to learn what any package does, most of the packages, I guess maybe all of the packages that you can download off of PyPy, off of the cheese shop, are the sources available. And if you want to find out what it really does, on some point you can go into the source code and you can scope it out, and you can, once you put that source code into your, let me show you this. You're gonna love this. Okay, we're gonna get, this is gonna be interesting. All right, so I'm going to go to here, my virtual environments. Hang on, let me see. Let me just check here. I want to make sure about which virtual environment this guy's using. Project. Here we go. So project interpreter is MDA dev. Okay, so virtual environments. MDA dev. I can't even see this. This is, go to lib, site packages, and among the site packages here is Flask. Now, you can pull up Flask, this installation of Flask, into the IDE and set breakpoints. I'm not going to do it right now, but you can, because if I do it, it's going to stick a PyCharm directory in here that I don't want to screw with. But you can do that, and you can put the breakpoints then in the into the source code, and you can find out what happens when. Once you start doing that type of stuff, you will get addicted to it. It's very revealing, and you begin to feel very knowledgeable. I started to say powerful, but actually it's just knowledgeable. That you're really delving into some of the secrets of what's going on here. And the two things that I've looked at most often are the Flask products, the Workzoid and Flask, and there's a package called Network X that's for dealing with graphs, and I use that as sort of a basic storage mechanism for the work that I'm doing, and it's beautifully written. It's again, it's it's a different style of coding, but it's elegant. It just looks really good. Massively developed, lots of good test cases in it, and all that stuff that we all don't do enough of. And I recommend it highly, that when you start working with some of these packages, that you go in and look at them, maybe even go in and pull them up and put them in the IDE and follow through some of the testing on it to get a feel for what's going on. You're not going to break anything. It's a virtual environment. You can always rebuild it. Just go in and go after it. It's really worthwhile. So my big reveal was the debug and the template. I think that Flask is, like I said, is an excellent learning tool, not just development. And I encourage you to do it. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Not a question, but I just wanted to make sure you don't actually have to pull it up there. If you do like from Flask, like, and if you call like render template somewhere and you do control click on the name, it'll actually pull up the code like from
Yes.
Flask. I just wanted to.
Yes, it will. You can put the, that's true. You can put the debug on the call to render template. And if you do single instruction steps, it will take you into the Flask. The problem with that is that you're then captive to do every single statement in the Flask
Oh no, I'm
library.
saying like go like to a code that you have like render template in it, and then on that render template do control click, and then click on that render template, and then you can put the debug statement in the code.
Fair enough. Well, let's see. Yeah, that will work. That will work. You're
I just
right.
want to make sure you knew.
I haven't done that.
love
I haven't done that, but that's an excellent
Someone taught me
suggestion.
the control click to go to a call, and like it's changed my life.
Very good. Very good. All right. Anything else? Okay. I'm just of my own accord. I declare that everybody gets one pizza. Ladies first. We have 5 pizzas. We have 5 people here. Go take something that you like. All right.
Merry Christmas.
Any other? I guess I turn it back to you. It's your meeting now.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
Wow, that's almost a standing ovation.
It was. Thank you so much. Cool. So, oh man, allow me to formally refund your money. The beer guy showed up at 8:15, and I was like, I don't want it anymore. So we officially got everything covered by
By our sponsor.
our illustrious sponsor. An intelligence agency. An intelligence
Yeah, that was a
agency.
very weird.
Called from Virginia. That's awesome. Kind of weird.
Well,
I don't
you know
know.
that
Never applying for a job for that.
you noticed that it's an intelligence agency and nobody actually showed up. That could just be a machine learning program.
This is true. All right, cool. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming out. Yes, it's totally true. If you want some pizza, take some pizza. I don't need more of it in my life. If it's there, I'm gonna eat it. It's gonna be a
All
problem.
right, everybody get one.
All right.
You guys
Thank
go
you.
first.
All right.
Cool.
I'll have another slice of my whole pie.
I wanted to talk to you about PyCharm.
Uh-huh.
Do you do program professionally or?
Well, starting in August, I'm starting at Google, and she's going to work at a PhD in San Francisco. So
Okay.
I will soon.
Okay. I was gonna say, because it's really easy to get an employer to pay $100 for something.
Oh, yeah,
I was
yeah.
gonna say
Yeah. The problem is that if they pay the $100 for it, they'll be like, yeah, it's only for what they want to do on their computers, and
Maybe. The other thing, they do have a community version. You can't use some things, like if you're trying to do like virtual machines, like the
Yeah, I
remote
don't know
people.
what
Yeah,
limitations
you can't do remote like anything on the
Yeah,
computer.
I don't know what the
version.
limitations are. I always just bought into it.
Yeah.
It's nice, yeah.
yeah, I mean we have like the student version, but I'm not going to be a student for that much longer.
You can do a
I can
PhD
pretend.
too.
I don't know how long they'll believe me. They'll
What
be
are
like,
you
oh,
gonna
you're.
do at Google?
Not sure yet. Literally, I'm starting in August, and my recruiter's like, "Yeah, team matching is gonna be happening soon. Get ready." And I'm like, I just want to know which office in San Francisco so I can pick an apartment.
Good luck with
Like,
that.
yeah, most people pick an apartment like when they start. Like, they have 2 weeks of corporate housing, and you can go look at apartments. I'm like,
No.
God,
Good luck.
do they not have
Good
girlfriends
luck
yet?
paying rent.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing.
There's this thing like in some professions, like in like if you're a chef or a mechanic, you're supposed to show up for work with like the tools required to do your
Yeah,
job.
like
Not like
hairdressers,
pots and
too.
pans, but like chefs bring tools or bring knives, and mechanics bring like 25 grand in tools. I just have the subscription to IntelliJ at this point, and I get like all the products, and like by the time it's like your 3rd year, it's like $150, and you get access to like all of it.
it's all
VS
written,
Code.
price does go
it's all
down.
written in
What is
Java,
that?
by the way.
VS Code.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that, but nice.
So I'm not really in the Python world.
Yeah.
I'm coming from JavaScript, and everybody uses VS Code.
Yeah.
But it's flexible. It's a Microsoft tool. I never thought I'd be using another Microsoft tool voluntarily.
Oh, yeah.
But it's great. It's free. It does everything you need.
Are you using
Yes.
the new JavaScript, ES6 or? Okay.
I think Microsoft.
Is that to 7 yet?
I have,
It's still ES6, all right.
well, no, they might have ordained the new version. I don't know. I know that it was on.
It's been a while since I tried working with it. I put very little JavaScript in the stuff that I do so far. If you want to see something even uglier, you should see the HTML code that I have for my project. It's really awful. But I tried using Bootstrap, and I found myself screwing around with Bootstrap more than I screwed around with my actual application. So I just gave it up and made some templates.
Yeah.
How did you get into being an expert witness?
I have a friend who was an expert witness, and he suggested to me multiple times over several years that I had the right sort of background to do it. And I said no, that I worked with attorneys in the 80s and I didn't want to see them anymore. And then one of the attorneys I worked with in the 80s asked me to write a report in a commercial dispute, an expert report, which I did. And as soon as the other guy found out about it, 3 weeks later, I was in my first patent suit. And over the course of about 2 years, I built up enough work that I could support myself just doing that work.
Wow.
So that's what I did.
For 1 hour a week.
What?
For 1 hour a week, you could support yourself doing that work.
Almost. I've begun referring to it as golden handcuffs. The income is so good from that that I can work 400, maybe 800 hours a year and have a real income.
Wow.
And so I want to do other stuff, and then it's like the Al Pacino thing. It just keeps pulling me back in because every time a job pops up, it takes priority because it's real money. And I keep trying and I keep trying, and I finally reached the point where if I will get out and do some talks and things like that, that it forces me to do some work and discover, debugging in the templates, that kind of stuff. And
I'm gonna use that.
For somebody who's not in the Python world, that's a very cool thing, to be able to catch the data moving in and out like that. But once you start doing it, the expert work, it's just kind of a word of mouth thing, and my friend kept sending me references, and after a while you worked for enough people that people start thinking of your name when projects come up. And like I said, I don't have to work all the time doing that. And about 4 years ago, almost exactly 4 years ago, middle of the month, 15th or 16th, I had a case up in Marshall, Texas that settled the day before trial started. And I suddenly had a big open spot. And I sat down and started writing Python code, 2013. So that's how expert witness work led to Python work. So I got a hole in my schedule. And I decided to fill it.
Fill it with Python.
Yeah, and it turns out that there's plenty of Python to fill the hole.
Yeah.
Although, one of the great things was, 6 months later, right at the end of the year, December 31st, I went to Incubator, which is near here somewhere, I don't know where they are, to just talk. I'm looking for some help. And that was when I discovered that Python was actually a popular language. I had no idea. But Inthought's customer base is all government labs, and they're like Continuum. Continuum is actually a spinoff of Inthought, and they started telling me about all the places it was used and the academic uses, and it was like, huh, who knew? And
It's big in the quantitative trading world.
yeah,
A lot of those guys use it.
yeah, there's a lot of it. It turns out that the only computer game that I've ever played outside of Lunar Lander on a teletype machine is Eve. And Eve is written in a nasty dialect of Python. Runs on a mainframe that runs the whole game. They have long ago forked Python. It may have been during the 1X days. I'm not sure if it was even 2X. They run a single Python instance to run an entire MMO. So.
Sounds fun.
Cool. Yeah, I'm a computational biologist, and all the labs use Python to do like large DNA.
Well, they're starting to use it in the CS classes more and more.
Yeah, that's actually what we worked on in our undergrad.
Yeah, I had like a senior thesis. I was like making, because our university had like a really crappy like intro to computers class. It was like CS for non-CS majors, and I worked with the professor to turn it into this whole like intro to Python, and we ended with like making a Flask website.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh,
it was
excellent.
Very, I mean, people liked it a lot. It's really just, big Python.
Big Python.
Well, but it's good to come out of school having written something real.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The-
I mean, yeah, these were people as cool as like, biology majors and,
Yeah.
Physics majors who've never touched.
I didn't write anything real until my master's thesis.
Did you do your undergrad in computers?
I'm sorry?
Did you do your undergrad in CS?
But my master's is in CS.
Okay.
The undergraduate's math and computer science and you don't have to tell anybody else. I have a law degree. My master's thesis I wrote during my first year of law school. I wrote a scheduling program to schedule interviews at the law school. And I wrote it on a data point mini microcomputer and data point COBOL. So
Oh my god.
that gives you some idea of how long.
Are you in
Yeah,
Proppy
he
Block by
made it in
chance?
high
Am I
school
what?
for
Are you
fun
in
and
Proppy
gave
Block?
I
it
don't know what that is.
to,
I guess not Eve.
So crazy.
In Eve Online.
he's an expert with
I'm sorry, do I what?
Yeah, he did. What is he an expert
You're talking
witness
about
in?
the game.
like
Yeah.
Samsung
He's
versus
asking
Apple.
about I don't know.
I haven't been in it for a while.
But what,
Oh,
what like
okay.
is the
So
specialty?
what,
Proppy
compression?
Block is like the small corporations. It's like a little,
Oh, okay.
just a certain area of things.
Oh, okay.
Which
No,
one
I'm
did you
not familiar with
testify
that.
Who
for?
did you
Like,
fly with?
I did it all on my own.
Oh, okay.
I had a couple of guys, a very small group, and I went into wormhole space a long time
You said
ago.
you
Okay,
flew
When wormhole space was new.
Doesn't it practice?
Okay.
And I tried, my last trip out, I tried
Yeah, audience.
getting in a
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so what
relatively
body
small
you? He
court
just does
renting
work
space out in Null City.
Got it.
And got run off because my wife had medical issues and I just had to
Gotcha.
stop. And that was a little over a year ago and I haven't been back.
Oh, okay.
But most of the time, what I wanted to do is I wanted to build a pod and move forward. I'm not a PvP guy.
Yeah.
I'm not a Twitch player, so.
Right.
But it was a lot of fun. I played from 2008 pretty actively for about 5 or 6 years.
Got it.
And then just kind of faded away.
I started like a year ago, and it's real neat. Like after playing for like 2 weeks, I started talking to this guy from the Dominican Republic,
Yeah.
and like I knew that he had some sort of like government position there or something,
Yeah.
and I was like, I'm gonna meet this guy, and I ended up going to Vegas like a couple of weeks later because he was in town. And then I didn't like smoking a cigar with this guy that like runs a construction
Well, I
company.
I never met anybody from the game, so
Gotcha.
I found out very little personal information about anybody.
Right.
But I'm not a joiner,
Got it.
and I'm not like I said, I'm not a PvP kind of guy. I learned to do the PvE stuff pretty well. If you gather enough goodies, you can do that.
Yeah.
But PvP never appealed to me.
Yeah,
I did go out and I was cannon fodder, I'm happy to do.
Yeah,
just never really got deeply into that market.
Alright.
But I become very well known.
Cool.
So, all right. Tiny go.
Alright.
Yeah, thank you
all
so
for
much.
coming. Uh-huh. It is.
I've actually thought about getting my patent, being patent agent, because I've got the, you don't have to be an attorney.
No, you don't.
And so I've thought about doing that.
Okay, well, if you'd like to talk about it,
So do you work
I have the easiest
I
email
do.
address.
I work, at Incubator.
It is Tipton at,
So this is like just a big like startup.
It is.
so if
So
you got
I
that,
was on
send
this
me an
for
email and we'll get
most
some
of last
time
year,
together,
and
sit
then I
down,
got,
coffee,
my company
Cool.
got its
That sounds
business
great. Yeah, do that.
Okay.
So yeah, I work for a company called
And it helps me in the
Incubator,
biz,
whose bread and
right?
butter is
Right.
operating a software network that connects
Thanks for the thought.
companies to
Yeah.
other companies.
Oh, okay.
And they're trying to move up the stack a little bit because, you know, it's a dying market to sell bandwidth effectively.
Yeah,
Even though it's very special, very low latency bandwidth, it's still just selling bandwidth.
Cool. You know the spaces.
Yeah, when they said 16th floor, usually when I'm 16th floor of the hotel, we're like, wow, is it gonna be in some dude's hotel room?
That'd be so awkward.
That would be really awkward. Yeah.
Have you seen the space yet?
No.
No, we've
Yeah.
only been in Austin for like 3 weeks or so.
Who wants the you wanna look around Capital Factory? Sir, Stack Overflow.
Oh, I
Sorry.
work here. I mean, I'm a coder.
Oh, got it.
Here, so,
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, where do you work?
I have a software company. We
Ooh.
do custom application development, but we're like a node shop. We do full stack JavaScript.
Oh.
But we have a Flask project that's coming up, and so I'm like, I need to learn more about this shit. So
Let me know if you need some help on that.
we do.
Okay.
Are you a consultant? Do you do contract work?
I'm very close to. I can't say that. I feel like I have a space on the fifth floor, but I have done consulting before. If I choose my stack and it's like a full stack web thing, I use Flask.
Okay. Have you done any like payment gateway integration?
Yes, Stripe.
Really?
Yeah. It's a pain in the ass. I won't lie.
Oh,
Like
no, we've done
like
it in Node. but-
payment and like user authentication are always just harder than you think because you have to cover every edge case.
Agreed.
Or you don't just, you know, if you don't have a Google account, you can't do the login process, but you know, you can't use my website.
I'll leave this for a minute and come back and grab some pies.
okay, it just occurred to me, if not everybody's taking a pizza, I have a use for one.
Do it.
Yeah.
Take as many as you want.
When that one's been used.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to find a hole one. You know?
Oh, this one's a whole lot.
It's okay. But don't give up. I'll take this one.
Okay.
I'm giving it to the valets downstairs.
Oh, yeah, that's nice. Okay, yeah.
I take the whole pizza, I give it to the other one.
I don't have a card.
I'll just, I was just looking for them. I don't know why I don't have them.
Okay.
I usually am stacked, but,
What's your number?
phone number is area code 248-212-6284.
I'm 248-613-3897. Number 248. No, I was.
So you're from Michigan?
Yeah.
What part?
Born in Dearborn Heights, grew up in Novi.
Get out of here. I grew up in Royal Oak. I moved out, so I spent the last 8 years in LA, but before that I was living in Dearborn.
All right.
All right.
That's awesome.
What's your name again?
Eric, what's your name?
Dave.
Dave.
Good name. So what do you do here? You work out of Capital Factory?
Yes, I work at IntelliQuint. It's
Okay.
the bread and butter of IntelliQuint is I just told him this. It's operating a fiber network that connects phone companies to phone companies. So
Okay.
it's like an impenetrable market, but it's also like the margins are disappearing. So they're trying to move the stack. I'm doing a machine learning project right now to like the first iteration of it is like detecting whether a voicemail machine answered the call,
Hmm.
and then yeah.
Well, what's your, I don't use like phone calls ever, what's your email? I'll just email you.
AdamsE@gmail.com. Man, this has been like the longest day.
Really? Why?
Wake up at 6,
Gross.
work out,
Well, that's your,
Go
that's
to
your
work.
problem.
happy hour. I have a standing happy hour every Thursday. And then coming here after happy hour is hard. I'm just saying.
You came after happy hour?
After happy
Well,
hour.
obviously happy hour, right?
I had to host.
What's the event? I mean, is it like an organized group or is it just some friends?
This group? Oh, it's just, it's friends, but we just have it as a standing thing, cause,
Gotcha.
you know, it's easier that way.
Something I need to learn. How do adults make friends?
It's not easy.
It involves a lot of poison.
Usually involves